So for part 11 of the review, what you're actually doing is it's asking you what is the range of f negative 1. And if you remember, f negative 1 is the inverse function. So what I'm going to do, before I can find the range of the inverse function, I need to find the inverse function. So I'm going to change this. So that becomes y equals the square root of x minus 4. And I'm trying to find the inverse function. Remember, inverse function, domain and range switch places. So that becomes x equals y minus 4. And if you remember talking back at our operations, when we use our operations, we have square root here. The inverse operation is to square it. So I'm going to square both sides. That gives me x squared equals y minus 4. And then my last step is simply to add 4 to both sides. Now here is my inverse function. So that's f negative 1 of x. But the question is, what is my range going to be? Well, there's two ways you can find the range. The first one is, and it's not always going to work, you can look at the smallest x value or input value you can plug in there and see what that is and see what the smallest range value you would get would be. Or you can use your calculator, which I'm going to. My inverse function is x squared plus 4. When I graph that, you can see it's a parabola, and the parabola has a minimum right there, and you can see it. It's kind of hard to see on the calculator. It's at 0, 4. So 0, 4 is my minimum. If 0, 4 is my minimum for my range and my domain, then what does that mean? How can I find the range? Well, the range is your y values. If I look at the graph here, it's everything from which point? It's everything from 4 up, because that is going to be your vertex. So your range for your inverse is going to be y must be greater than or equal to 4, because that's the smallest y can be. What's the smallest x could be? 0. So 0 plus 4 is y, so that's the smallest it can be. All right, so let's look at 11b. (11b) is f of x equals the square root of x plus 6. Now, what you need to notice about this, well, we'll talk about it after we change it. Remember, we change it, so y equals square root of x plus 6. I want to find the inverse first. I'm looking for the range of the inverse. So I'm going to flip-flop x and y, so x equals the square root of y plus 6. Well, let's do our first step here. I need to move the 6 over, so it's positive, so I'm going to subtract it. So x minus 6 equals the square root of y. Well, my next step is to get a y, not a square root of y. The inverse operation is squared. The square of a square root gives you that number. And then this just says x minus 6 squared. I don't think you're going to be asked to expand it out. Okay, let's look at the last one for number 11. So for 11c, we have 2 times the square root of x minus 15. And I just realized something. We'll come back. Plus 4 equals f of x. It's late, I'm getting tired. Let's look at this previous example. We wanted to find the range, and we stopped at the equation. So I'm going to bring the calculator back. Hopefully you can see it. And I'm going to clear out the first one, and I'm going to put this one in. So x minus 6 squared. And I'm going to graph it. Okay, if I hit trace, eventually I'll see my cursor. You can tell there, it looks like it's real close to y is 0 and x is 6. So for my range, it's going to be all values greater than my lowest y, which is 0. So the range value for this is going to be y greater than or equal to 0. So let's look at the last one. The last one, I'm going to make this a y. So y equals 2 times the square root of x minus 15 plus 4. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to switch those x's and y's. So x equals 2 y minus 15 plus 4. Once I've done that, then I'm going to move on to all the operations. Now, remember, you look and see if there's a radical. Well, this is the radical I need to isolate. That's the one that's going to get left out. So I'm going to subtract 4. So I've got x minus 4 equals 2 times the square root of y minus 15. And my next, again, I want to get this one all by itself, so I'm going to divide both sides by 2. Those will go to 1. So 1/2 x minus 2, because it's 4 over 2, equals square root of y minus 15. And again, that's just through algebraic manipulation. So my last step is going to be to cube it. I want to, or sorry, square it. So to get rid of the square root, I'm going to square both sides. So 1/2 x minus 2 squared equals y minus 15. And then to solve for y, we just add the 15. So your answer is going to be 1/2 x minus 2 squared plus 15 equals y. Now the question is, what the heck is the range on this? Well, again, you got to look at the smallest value you can get. The smallest thing I could get is if this were 0, this parentheses. So the smallest value for y I could get would be 15. But for range, if this becomes 0, this can be 0. This is the smallest it can be because it's squared. The smallest the range can be is 15. So y has to be greater than or equal to 15. Now you can graph it again and look at it on the graph, and you can also do the same information.